Hello, everybody. It's me, it's the Nutty Professor, and I have here one of my very, very wriggly children. Okay, you want to wriggle? You want to sit and podcast with Dad? You want to wriggle? Wriggle. Okay, now I am starting this as usual, wearing my mask, even though I don't really need to because I'm inside only with the cats. But I'm starting with the mask just because we are in the middle of a pandemic and just to remind people wear your mask. And, the mask matches my black Mini Cooper cap and my Nutty Professor t shirt. Now, the Mini Cooper cap. I have something to say about this. The Mini Cooper podcast that was taped a couple of months ago, soon after I got the car, I was not wearing a Mini Cooper hat because I didn't have one. I was wearing a BMW cap. And after that, my mechanic uh, gave me this. It's a Mini Cooper hat. It's got a very small, discreet logo. Now, my relatives had seen that original podcast, and for Christmas, they gave me this one. And they went to some trouble. They had to go to a mini dealership that had a black one. There was only one available in the town, and they had to go get it. So so this is a Christmas gift from relatives. So now I have two. So when I want to be a proud mini owner, driver, I can wear this one with the big logo. And then when I want to be just a little bit more discreet, I can wear this one. So for this podcast, I'm going to wear this one. Now, in this podcast, I just want to follow up the previous ones. So this I'm going to call, and I'm still using the whiteboard markers for this. I'm going to call this one the follow-up to the evaluation of PATAP, the four-part one, and those were taped just before Christmas. Now it's about 10 days into the new year, so I do also want to wish everybody a happy new year from myself, the Nutty Professor, and my furry kids. I do want to follow up, but I'm going to have a properly edited with titles on the screen rather than the whiteboards, hopefully, in about 2 to 3 weeks. I want to have a properly edited podcast, which will be hopefully celebrating 1 year clear, so I'm now 11 months and 10 days or so clear, so another 2.5 weeks, it will be 1 year clear. And I've asked my former student, now producer, if he can edit, so we'll tape remotely again because of COVID and stuff, but I'll send it to him and gonna have proper titles on the screen and some images and some stuff, so to celebrate 1 year clear. Now, in the meanwhile, I want to do a couple of these, self-taped, posted ones. As I said, kind of following up some thoughts I've had, some issues. Now, I do want to add some concepts, the idea of return rather than recovery, one of the Nutty Prof, less judgmental terms. And I want to use the framework of Joseph Campbell and the heroic journey and the return to the ordinary world, changed and all of that stuff. So I'm going to go through that in the next part, might even end up being 3 parts, but we'll see. But today I just want to talk about, a thought I had. I call myself the Nutty Professor. That is my persona. And last year, during a couple of podcasts, I think they were the Jung's Shadow Part 1 and Part 2 ones, I did talk about how, and I was struggling at the time, and I did talk about how I was trying to stay nutty and not go crazy, or maybe even the next step, psycho. I was trying to stay the nutty prof, not end up crazy prof or psycho prof. And during a couple of binges, I definitely, I think, did go a little crazy, and, kind of verging on the psycho, too. But I pulled back and I've come back and I've been clear. It's been a struggle. It's not been easy, but they've been clear 10 and, 11 and a half months now. So, and at the time, and, I think in podcasts I have said, when COVID was happening and when it first started and people were going a little crazy and panicking and, fighting over toilet paper and stuff like that. And I kind of said, the world's going a little crazy here, but the Nutty Prof is just trying to stay nutty and they get caught up in the craziness. Now, I'm not going to comment on any political stuff. A friend of mine had suggested that Nutty Prof can do some political, issues, and I'm going, no, not my thing at all, But I will just say that, some pretty crazy stuff has been happening in the world, and people are getting caught up in craziness and, going the next step into cycle, So all I'm going to say is I kind of hope the world kind of pulls back, kind of tones it down from, psycho to crazy and crazy to nutty. The way I use nutty, it's affectionately. It's, it's my persona. It's, it's self-deprecatory, it's playful, so and it's with awareness. But unfortunately, I think people are kind of getting caught up in the crazy stuff, with the awareness and with the playfulness, and things are not good. So anyway, that was just my little thought. But that actually led to a couple of theorists. Thoughts about theorists that I want to discuss. And one of them is R.D. Laing. And he did talk about, the whole thing about labels. And, he wasn't talking about nutty psycho, but he was talking about psychiatric classifications. And he was a psychiatrist himself, sometimes affiliated with the anti-psychiatric movement, but he didn't really like that term anti-psychiatry. Sometimes I think he's classified as a humanist. This was in the 70s, 60s, 70s, and into the 80s. I think he died at the end of the 80s. And one of his most famous quotes was that insanity is sometimes insanity is a perfectly rational adjustment to an insane world, And his most famous book was probably titled Sanity, Madness in the Family. And I think he also wrote The Divided Self, and after he died, it was kind of revealed. I mean, there's some reports that he was struggling himself. He may have been struggling with depression and alcohol use himself. So he was possibly a struggler himself. Now, he influenced a chap named David Rosenhan, and Rosenhan was a psychologist in the United States. And in 1973, he did a very famous study, sometimes called the Being Sane in Insane Places study. And I used to talk about this in lectures when discussing categorization and labeling and stuff like that. But what he and his colleagues, his cohorts, and they were a couple of psychologists, a couple of graduate students, a housewife, a painter, about 8 to 10 people. And they went separately to different psychiatric hospitals in the United States, and they reported auditory hallucinations. So they just went and they said, I'm hearing voices in my head, and the intake person would say, what is the voice saying? And they would say, the voice is saying thud. Said hello, and that counted as auditory hallucination, and they were admitted, as schizophrenics, because auditory hallucination is a symptom of schizophrenia in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. At that time, I think it was the DSM-2 or so. So they were all admitted. Now, as soon as they were admitted, they stopped faking completely. And they would go to therapy sessions and they would tell the truth, except that they're in the study, and except that if they were psychologists, they wouldn't They'd leave that part out, but they'll tell the truth about, being married, not married, childhood stuff. They'd answer questions, but they didn't report hearing voices anymore. And the funny part of the study is that not one was spotted by the actual mental health professionals, by psychologists, psychiatrists, nurses, social workers. Not one was spotted. But the really funny part is that other mental patients, the so-called quote real unquote mental patients, psychiatric patients, would come up to them and they would go, "Excuse me, are you doing a study? Are you a journalist? Are you an investigative journalist? Investigating conditions in psychiatric hospitals? Because you're not nuts. You're not one of us. You're normal. What are you doing here?" The other patients would come up to them, but not one was spotted by an actual, professional. And then when they were released as up to 2 months. Average of about 2 weeks, but a couple of them were kept up to 2 months. And when they were released as schizophrenics in remission. And I used to talk about how this indicates, that once you label somebody, the label sticks. And everything that they did was seen in light of their being a psychiatric patients. So they'd be taking notes, and somebody would write down, a nurse would comment on the chart, going, "Patient is engaging in paranoid note-taking behavior." Everything that they did was seen in light of the fact that they were seen as schizophrenics. They were even released as schizophrenics in remission. So that's the follow-up to that. Kind of funny too. There was a big uproar, and psychiatrists, psychologists, mental health professionals, they said, "Oh, that's not fair. You didn't warn us." So he said, "Okay, I'm giving you a warning. Over the next month, I'm going to send a bunch of a few more pseudo patients, see if you can spot them." So over the next month, they've spotted about 40%. And they said, "These are the people that we don't believe are really mentally ill. They're just faking. We spotted them. Here they are. These are the people. 40% of our intake are your patients." And he said, "I didn't send anybody." He said, "I didn't send anyone. I said I was going to, but I didn't." So again, that's the whole thing in terms of labeling. So maybe we'll do another podcast on Lang and Rosenhan at a later point. We'll come back to some of these issues. So, but for now, we're going to come back. We're going to come back to part 2, where I talk about Campbell and the heroic journey and some other stuff and some thoughts I've had. But for now, I just want to say this is the Nutty Professor trying to stay nutty, and from myself and my furry children. Bye.